We'll wait for a few more people to pop in. Kia ora. Morena, everyone. Welcome to another Q&A event here at Digital Boost. I'm Georgia Hatchis, and today we have Sam Leggett here from CERT NZ. Now, if you don't know what CERT NZ does, Sam is going to walk us through that, but it is New Zealand's Computer Emergency Response Team. So I don't know, unless you've been living off the grid, which if you're on this call, you're not living off the grid, none of us are. You have cybersecurity on the mind. You might get a weird email that tells you to click a link. Maybe my friend, the Nigerian prince, is asking you to hold on to his millions for him, you know, until he gets out of the country. I personally apparently have a lot of Bitcoin accumulated that I'm supposed to claim. I've never invested in Bitcoin, so I don't know where this came from. All I have to do is click a link though, and I can get it. Sam's here to talk us through how to keep our businesses safe with CERT NZ's 10 critical controls. So we're lucky to have him here. If you have questions, please join the conversation. I'm sure you're going to have a lot of questions when it comes to this. I'm going to be checking the Q&A function, the chat function, wherever you're streaming in from. Please, please, please just ask our questions and we'll try to get them answered for you. All right, Sam, welcome.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Georgia. Kia ora, everyone. Like Georgia said, my name is Sam Leggett. I'm a senior analyst with CERT New Zealand's Threat and Incident Response Team. I'm just getting my slides up on screen. Here we go. Okay, so today there's a few things that I wanted to cover off with everyone. Bit of an introduction to start with. Who is CERT? What do we do? Why should you listen? What are we seeing affecting New Zealand businesses? What's actually happening currently in the landscape? What are the things that you should be looking out for? And then what are the top tips to sort of combat those things? Where can you start as a business owner when you're looking at cybersecurity? It can be really hard to figure out what to do, even where to begin, especially if this isn't your area of expertise. So my goal with today's presentation is hopefully to give you some tangible things that you can do, that you can use, resources, tools, tips, so that you can walk away from today's presentation and you have some idea of one thing, even one thing that you can do to improve your cybersecurity for your business. Right, so as Georgia said, CERT New Zealand is the Computer Emergency Response Team. We're a government agency focused on improving the cyber resilience of all New Zealanders. Now, I say all New Zealanders because it really is all New Zealanders. Our remit basically ends at nationally significant organisations or critical infrastructure where our colleagues at the National Cybersecurity Centre will step in for assistance. That leaves us with a really large number of New Zealanders, small, medium, large businesses, to help them improve their cybersecurity and improve their cybersecurity resilience. We provide guidance and response services for all New Zealanders at no cost. So anyone can jump on our website at cert.gov.nz and report a cybersecurity incident. They can get free advice and guidance on how to deal with that incident, and actually, more importantly, how to improve their cybersecurity so that hopefully they don't deal with that same incident again in the future. Like I say, that could be individuals, it could be organizations, small to medium businesses, just like we're here for today. And the key there is that information and advice is trusted. You know, we're partnering with a number of CERT teams around the world. We are not the only national CERT that exists. I believe last time I checked, there was 500 and something odd teams that exist. So it's a really large network. And we're constantly using that network to make sure that we're up to date with the latest. We know what's going on and that our advice is fit for purpose. And then we take all the reports that we see and we create a threat landscape report for New Zealand in the form of our quarterly report and our data landscapes report. And basically that just serves to give everyone else an idea of what we're seeing in New Zealand. The data landscapes report breaks it down a little bit further into what individuals are seeing, what businesses are seeing, and it also breaks things like the financial loss of these kinds of incidents down as well. Now, why is this important? There's a little bit of writing on the screen, but at the end of the day, if you are online, if you have a website, if you have a computer, if you have a phone, you are in the digital space. And so cybersecurity is important to you. Gone are the days where we could say that no one's targeting me. I don't have any money in the bank. I don't have a big business. No one's going to come after me. The reality these days is if you're online, you're a potential target. What we see more and more is that attackers are far more volumetric and opportunistic than they are targeted these days. So when we think about those emails that Georgia was talking about earlier, they are sending those out to as many people as they possibly can, trying to make as many victims as they possibly can. It isn't about who you are or what you have anymore. It is about whether or not they can make a victim out of you. And with all that in mind, it's really important that we do what we can to improve our own cybersecurity. Now, what's actually affecting New Zealand businesses? This is taken from our latest quarterly report for Q2 this year. And it's no surprise that phishing and credential harvesting is the biggest incident that's reported through to us. Now, that can lead to a lot of other incidents, ones that are listed in the categories and ones that you might not find there. Phishing and credential harvesting is basically the malicious use of messages, whether that's an email, a text, or even a phone call, pretending to be from some reputable organization, trying to get you to provide some kind of detail. That might be your login credentials, that might be your personal information, it might even be your banking and credit card credentials. And this is the number one thing that we see most. Now, like I say, it can lead to other kinds of incidents. You give your credit card credentials, that could lead to some kind of scam where they're taking money from your account. You give your bank account credentials, that might lead to unauthorized transfer of money from your bank account. You give your login credentials, that could lead to a compromise of various online accounts. That might be your email account, your social media account, anything like this. It could be your business email account, which could lead to a number of issues happening like invoice scams. And it could also result in them getting access to your business systems and then deploying some kind of malware, most specifically ransomware, which is really, really bad for businesses. So everything sounds really bad. Where do we start? What do we do? How can we improve our cybersecurity? And there's a couple of resources that I want to point you to on CERT New Zealand's website. The first one is the top 11 tips for businesses. And we're not going to go through all of these today, but there is a link in these slides, which I'm sure can be shared afterwards so that you can get yourself to this page. You can have a look at these tips, and there's a few key specific details in there. But it does overlap nicely with what we call our 10 critical controls. And this is what we're really going to focus on today. The 10 critical controls are basically the top 10 security controls that if were implemented by a business, the vast majority of incidents that we see reported to us would be mitigated. That's the starting point. There's a lot of cybersecurity frameworks out there. You might have heard of NIST, you might have heard of the ISO 27001, and they are very technical documentations. They go into great detail about the very specific technical things that you can do to protect your business. This is supposed to serve as a much more entry-level starting point for cybersecurity for your average business owner who might not have any expertise in tech, IT, or security at all. And we're going to look at
I don't know who that might be.
Yeah, so hopefully the ones that we're going to look at specifically today are of the less technical nature. These are the things that if I were to go and start a business tomorrow, these are the things that I would be looking at implementing myself to make sure that I've got a really nice cybersecurity posture. Now, the first one, which is the first on the list of 10 critical controls, is patching your software and systems. What does that mean? It means keeping your devices up to date. It might be the software that you use on your devices, it might be the operating systems themselves, but it is really important that we keep these things up to date as quickly as possible. Now, we've all had the pop-up in the bottom right-hand corner of our screen saying you need to update your operating system. And we've all hit delay for a day or 2 days or 7 days, and it can be a bit of a pain. But there is a really important reason why we need to get those updates as soon as possible, especially on business devices. What those updates give us is not just the latest features. It's not just about accessing the new coolest thing on the app or whatever it may be. They actually are addressing security vulnerabilities that are constantly appearing in software and applications. What can a vulnerability allow an attacker to do? And this is actually more important for businesses than it is for individuals. When we do see targeted attacks, it is more facing the business side of things than it is the individual side of things. Now, attackers can exploit vulnerabilities in software to do things like deploy remote code executions. It's very technical terminology. Basically, it gives them some kind of access to your environment, to your software that you might be using. From there, they might be able to do something like deploy some kind of malware, even in the worst cases, ransomware. So when we get these updates as soon as possible, as soon as they come out from the vendor, it means that we're protected from those security vulnerabilities and they can't be exploited to give these attackers an initial foothold in our environments. It's really important that we get them as soon as possible. And so wherever you can, setting those updates to install themselves automatically is actually a really great step to take. That means you don't have to spend time thinking about it. You're going to get the update as soon as possible. It's going to keep you nice and safe from any vulnerabilities that might appear. CERT New Zealand have what we call advisories. So where we see a really critical vulnerability that against a piece of software that might be quite widely used in New Zealand, we'll release an advisory on that to give people a bit of an idea of what it is, what they need to do, and how they can fix the problem. But more often than not, the advice that comes with that advisory is to update that particular software to the latest version as soon as you can. Now, I've got a link to the advisories later. I do recommend that any business owners sort of subscribe to those. You can get some updates to any critical vulnerabilities that are appearing so that you can sort of stay up to date with that stuff. But if you updated all your software and all your operating systems as soon as those updates came out, you wouldn't need those advisories, really. The other recommendation here is to make sure that you understand the devices in your environment and whether or not they're still supported by a vendor. So say I have a laptop that I use for my business and it has Windows 10, Windows 11, whatever it may be on it. It's important that I make sure I understand how long that particular version is going to be supported by the vendor. When it's no longer supported by the vendor, it becomes what we call a legacy system. Now, legacy systems, because they don't have that ongoing support by the vendor, they can often result in some really critical vulnerabilities. And it's just important to acknowledge when something within your environment becomes legacy and look at moving that out of your environment, not using that for your business anymore.
So Sam, I'm just going to jump in because I know sometimes the operating systems outgrow the actual device that you're on and you need to upgrade your device. So does your computer then become a legacy computer and you just need to update it to a better computer, a newer computer? Like, what's your recommendation for that?
Yeah, if the software on the computer itself is still getting ongoing updates from the vendor, then you're still going to be protected from these security vulnerabilities. The reality is that you're probably just going to notice some decaying performance from that piece of device, that laptop, phone, whatever it may be. It's probably going to be a little bit slower. It might not be able to handle all the updates from the software that you use, that you have coming in. But it's the software itself that's really important to make sure it is updated to the latest version wherever possible to keep yourself safe from those vulnerabilities. I would much prefer having an older device with up-to-date software than a really new device with really outdated software. That would put me at a much riskier position in terms of security.
And before we move on to the next part, just break down malware versus ransomware for me. Like, what would be evidence? Like, for example, in my computer, I've got malware. How would I know that? I'm sure the ransomware is where they lock everything, and then I have to pay my Bitcoins that I'm accumulated to get it open. But talk to me about malware a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So malware is kind of the umbrella term. Basically just means malicious software, and that's where ransomware comes under. But malware looks like a lot of different types of things. Malware, the most common versions that we see are typically info stealers. So that's where if it gets into your device, it's trying to find credentials wherever they may be stored. It might be trying to capture credentials when you're entering them into online accounts or login pages. But malware can really spread quite wide in terms of what it looks like. There's even a type of malware specifically for mobile devices called adware, where it basically just runs ads in the background for ad revenue on the back of the scammer or attacker in this case, I guess. What you'd notice is a decrease in performance on the device because it's got a much higher processing load with the malware running in the background. Your device will probably be overheating a lot quicker than you would typically notice. The battery drains faster, all these kinds of things. And that's where having some kind of antivirus, anti-malware software on your device is a great step to take. Typically, these actually come with the device out of the box these days, which is really great. If you've got a Windows device, that'll come preloaded with Windows Defender, which is a great piece of software. And then running a scan through those pieces of software just to determine if you've got anything on your device is a really great step to take. But ransomware is the big bad of the malware category, and it does, as you say, gets into your system, locks down all your files and data and information, and then demands a ransom out of you before you can get access back to those. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit because I'd much rather people take some of the advice on these lists rather than pay that ransom. But we've got a good tip for you.
Yeah, and if you need Bitcoin, I've got it. So just contact me. But also, I've lost it. I was going to ask another question, but continue. Sorry.
Alrighty. Now, just very quickly, what is patching your software and systems? What does it actually help you stop? As I said, vulnerability exploitation, which can lead to a number of other things, but the real keys here are that deployment of ransomware or malware, but ransomware being a big bad on your devices in your but also that unauthorized access. If they can exploit a vulnerability in your environment and get some kind of foothold into your system, then they can probably get some level of unauthorized access, and that's when all the other bad things can start happening. So patching your software and systems just helps you keep yourself safe from these kinds of threats. Now, the second tip is implementing multi-factor authentication. The first thing I'll say is that there's a lot of different terms that are used to explain the same thing here. Multi-factor authentication, two-step authentication, two-step verification, the list goes on. They are all referring to the same thing. And what this is an additional layer of protection on top of your username and password. Now, password security has been the basis of cybersecurity for as long as I can remember. And that is the first factor of authentication. You enter your username and you enter your password and you get to log into your account. Two-factor or multi-factor authentication is adding another layer on top, and that other layer is typically something you have or something you are. So it might be that you get prompted to enter a biometric lock. You might have to enter your thumbprint. It might be a retinal scan. It might be a face ID scan. It might be that you've got an app on your phone and that generates a code for you to then enter. And it might be that you get sent a text message with a code that you enter in order to log in. Multi-factor or two-factor authentication is probably the most powerful tool that I have on this list, especially where we see that phishing and credential harvesting is the biggest issue both individuals and organizations are facing in New Zealand. Basically, multi-factor authentication, what it'll mean is that if you did fall victim for a phishing attack, say you got a text message, you click the link and you entered your login credentials. Now, an attacker out there somewhere has your valid login credentials. And say they went to log into your Facebook, that's the credentials that you provided. They go to log into your Facebook, but you have two-factor authentication enabled. That means that you're going to get sent a text, or you're going to get sent a code, or you're going to get an alert that needs to be acknowledged in order for that account to be logged into. Now, that attacker isn't going to have your phone, isn't going to be able to see these codes, isn't going to have your thumbprint or your eye specifically. So then we're not going to be able to get past that second layer challenge. And it also serves as a bit of an alert for you. If you have two-factor authentication enabled and you get a two-factor authentication alert without having logged into any accounts, it suggests that someone else is trying to log into that account. And it gives you a good indication that you need to go away and look at that account and maybe change that password, improve the security there however you need to. But it gives you a bit of a warning that someone's trying to log in there. I really can't understate just how powerful two-factor authentication is, just how many things it can stop, but it is not an infallible system. And some people may have heard about the Uber breach that happened last year or 2021, I'm not quite sure. But that was a really great example of social engineering to get around two-factor authentication. Basically, an attacker had valid credentials that they were trying to use to log in. There was two-factor authentication enabled on that account. So what they did was around 3 a.m. for the employee, they started spamming them with two-factor authentication challenges. And then they started sending them messages on WhatsApp to say, I'm from Uber support, I'm a technical member, I need access to your account just so I can get in and fix an issue. Being 3 a.m., being that this guy was pretty tired, being that he had received hundreds of authentication attempts, messages, at this point, he simply hit approve. He allowed it. He acknowledged it. And that's how social engineering can really get around these things. But what it does mean is that those scammers and that those attackers, they have another obstacle to get through. Not only do they have to get your credentials, but now they have to find some way that they can engineer a code out of you. Which technically speaking, SIM swapping attacks are a thing, very uncommon, and they require that the attacker go into a store or call up a store in order to get that SIM swap processed. Social engineering is a much more common tactic to try and get these kinds of codes out of people. But if the one thing that
what about now that we've got virtual SIMs and you don't actually have to use a physical SIM? Is it harder for them to swap out SIMs, or is it pretty much a similar
process as far as I sort of understand? So it's sort of a process of getting in touch with the provider and providing proof that you are who you say you are and that you can approve this sort of SIM swap. So it might be that this might be where privacy settings on your social media accounts really come into play. I'm not sure of what all the specific security questions that the providers use are, but in my experience of 5 years fraud prevention at TradeMe, I do know that security questions are not necessarily the best tool to be using to confirm people are who they say they are, especially when a lot of that information can be found on Facebook and social media.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really good tip to take away, is that you pay some mind in terms of what your security or your privacy settings on your social media are and who can see your information, whether or not you share that level of information. Standard security questions are things like full name, date of birth, and address. And most people, I assume, probably have that information online. So it's a really good step to take, just to think about what information is online and who can see it, and maybe lock that down a little bit. As I was going to say, if people take one thing away from today, implementing two-factor authentication on your really critical business accounts is probably the most powerful thing you can do. And it's free in most cases. There's very, very few cases where it's not. I have a link later in the slides, which basically takes you to a directory, and it will show you what services, what websites offer two-factor authentication and in what form. It's a nice little register of who does 2FA how, kind of. But like I say, if you take one thing away, if it was implementing two-factor authentication on your business email account and your bank account, that would be great. That would be a really strong step to make sure that you're a little bit more secure and keep you safe from things like phishing and credential harvesting. Even if you do fall victim, even if you do click those links and provide those details, you've got that additional layer of protection to keep you and your business nice and safe. As I said, phishing and credential harvesting is going to help protect against that. It's going to help protect against unauthorized access and therefore unauthorized transfer of money, especially wherever you can enable two-factor authentication on your bank account. And if we enable it on our business systems, our business accounts and things like that, it's going to help us against ransomware as well, because it's going to prevent the attackers from getting in before they can deploy ransomware or other types of malware as well. Really, really powerful tool. I really can't overstate how powerful it is. Right, number 3, provide and use a password manager. This one is really more all about passwords. So we'll be spending a bit of time talking about passwords. Password managers are a great step to take. And the reason being, because most people have 50 to 150 online accounts these days. Now, I don't know about you, I can remember about 2 or 3 good passwords, and that's where my limit is reached. So password managers can then come in as a really powerful tool to not only store our passwords, but they can actually generate our passwords for us. And what they do when they generate a password is they're going to generate a really strong, unique password. It's going to be over 30 characters long, random characters, letters, symbols, and all this kind of stuff. It's going to create a really, really strong password that most humans wouldn't be able to remember. But it does mean that we have a master password. So when we log into our password manager, the password we use to log into it is called our master password. And it basically serves as the key to our safe, or the key to the kingdom, right? If an attacker can get that master password, yes, theoretically, they can get all your passwords. So it does increase the risk associated to that password, master password. But it means that we only have to put our effort and time into remembering one really good password. One long, strong, unique password that hasn't been used anywhere else, and we can use as our master password to keep us nice and safe. Now, there's a few sort of tools, resources on CERT's website to help you create a really strong password. Passphrases are one recommendation used around there. If you use a password manager, the stronger you can make that master password, the more secure you are going to be. The other thing that the password managers can really help with is actually when we do fall victim to phishing or credential harvesting, if we do click that link, the vast majority of the times we don't know what our password for the account they're actually requesting is, because it's a 30-character long randomly generated password by our password manager. That means that most times we actually can't provide our password to those phishing and credential harvesting attacks, which is another way that we can keep ourselves nice and safe. Now, the question that I always get whenever I talk about password managers is, what about Google Chrome? You know, there's a password manager built into that internet browser. Is that fit for purpose? I do know a lot of people choose to use that. My recommendation, especially for businesses, to stay away from that. The reason being, what people don't realize is that when they use Google Chrome as their password manager, their Google account or their Gmail account has now become their password manager account. Their password for that account has now become their master password. But it also means that any devices that you stay auto-logged into your Gmail account will have access to all your passwords and anything that you have saved the password for. It means that our devices become sort of keys themselves, and we need to make sure those are nice and safe. It also means that any vulnerabilities that pop up around Google or Google Chrome become even more critical for us, and we need to make sure, going back to step one, that we're updating as regularly as possible. So they're not the worst things in the world. I would argue that using a browser password manager is better than having really bad passwords that you use on all your accounts. It's all the same, but it does increase the risk in certain ways, and we need to be mindful of that. So making sure your devices are nice and secure themselves with some kind of password code, biometric, whatever it may be, making sure whatever browser you choose to use is updated as regularly as possible, and you're getting up that update as quick as possible, and actually acknowledging that in the case of Google, for example, your Gmail or your Google account has now become your master password, has become your password manager, is really important as well. I will say the one benefit that things like Google Chrome really do have is that wherever you do save a password there, they will let you know wherever that password appears in a data breach. Now, the reason that we often recommend password managers over creating your own passwords, not just because they're so hard to remember, but because password reuse is actually a real big issue. So data breaches happen through no fault of our own. Big companies have data breaches, and often our information can end up online out there for attackers to consume and use. This often includes our passwords. So where we use the same password on all our accounts, if we have a data breach with that password in it, it puts all those accounts at risk. Now, it's a very common attack tactic for attackers to use what's called a password lookup attack. They take a long list of known used passwords and they try to breach your accounts using these passwords. If they have a combination between your email and your password, and you use that password on all these other accounts that you use the same email for, they can probably get into all those different accounts. So not using the same passwords is probably the most important takeaway, and password managers really enable and allow you to do that in a much easier way. However, if you only take one thing away from this slide, it would be to make sure that you have a long, strong, and unique password on those critical accounts that we've kind of already mentioned. So things like your business email account, your bank account, any social media that you might use for your business, and as well as any kind of government accounts, IRD or Realme come to mind. Having a good, long, strong, unique password on those accounts is the most important thing. And using a password manager can enable you to do that a little bit easier.
So Sam, if you are, let's say Google Chrome ends up being your password manager, would you recommend taking off any passwords or removing any passwords from that manager that you don't want breached? Or for example, let's say Google Chrome automatically does it for you, right? Like I know that Google Chrome has all of my passwords. Don't go in and steal my stuff, guys. I know you're all listening. So I'm going to get rid of it. I'm going to get, I don't know, LastPass or some other password manager. And so then should I go into Google Chrome and then delete all the passwords out of there?
Yeah, my recommendation would probably be those critical accounts are probably ones you want to avoid using something like Google Chrome's built-in password manager for. If you have something more specific like LastPass or NordPass, something like that, using something like that for those critical accounts is really important. But look, it's a ease of access thing, right? A lot of people store those passwords in Google Chrome because it makes it so much easier for them when they come back and they do it next time. And we understand that. And there's this balancing act between ease of access and security. I would recommend taking a little bit more caution around those really critical accounts specifically. If you use a password manager, like we said, with a specific one, using that for those critical accounts is a great step to take. For the accounts that don't really have any information on you, that don't have access to bank accounts or credit cards or anything like that, I mean, look, if you decide to use Google Chrome for that, that's not the end of the world. Few additional steps to take. Make sure your Google is updated as regularly as possible. Make sure that device is nice and safe. Make sure your Gmail account has a really good password on it. Enable two-factor authentication there, and then you should be okay.
Great, thank you.
No worries. So password manager, again, can help against phishing and credential harvesting, can help against password guessing and cracking. It's not a very common tactic, but it does happen where passwords can be guessed and cracked by attackers. But if you have a password generated by a password manager, It's really unlikely they're going to do that. It'll take some astronomical number of trillions of years to crack a password that long. But it can also help against unauthorized access and unauthorized transfer of money, especially if our bank account password is generated and stored in our password manager. And again, by having a password manager on our really important business systems, we're going to help prevent access by attackers and therefore prevent the deployment of things like ransomware. Now, speaking of ransomware, implementing and testing backups is also on the list of critical controls. And it's really important, especially when we think about something like ransomware. What does backups mean? Basically, any important information that you have, it might be a database of customer information, it might be files of really important business information, whatever it is. Any important information, having a backup is not only a good business practice, just in case you need to access it at another time from another location, whatever it may be. It also is going to allow you to recover from something like ransomware. If your environment does get ransomware, if your files and your information, your data do get locked down, but you actually had a backup that you implemented last week, I can go grab that backup and I can start restoring from that backup without even entering in a conversation with this attacker. Yep, I'm going to lose maybe about a week's worth of information. And so the cadence of backups becomes really important. And that's going to be determined by your organization, your size, your capacity. But the more regularly you back up, the less data you're going to use in that case. Ransomwares, unfortunately, we have seen businesses pay those ransoms and we have seen them not get access to their information back. We've seen businesses pay ransoms and we've seen them get ransomed a second time. We've seen businesses be ransomed, we've seen them pay, and then we've seen that data end up online anyway. Paying that ransom, unfortunately, is no guarantee that you'll get your information back, that you'll get that access back, or that information won't end up online already. So having some way that we can recover and we can get our business back to normal operation that isn't in the hands of the attackers, that we can enable ourselves, is really, really important. And backups are the golden key to recovery when it comes to something like ransomware. One really important thing here is like I say, the cadence of your backups, how regularly you go through that backup process, and actually testing those backups, making sure that you can recover from them, that you can restore from them, that everything's working as it should. Again, the cadence of what you do that is going to be determined by your organization. And then the last really important tip when it comes to backups is actually making sure that it's stored in a different location to your operational network. So if I have a business, maybe I just have one server and I have a website that I run off that. It's really important that I make sure that my backups aren't stored on that same server. Reason being, if an attacker gets into our system, they lock everything down on that server, it's going to include the backups and they're going to be ultimately useless for me. So having that in a different location, it might be some kind of hard drive that I keep secure in a safe somewhere else. I might even look to use a cloud service for this kind of process. And that's a reasonable process to look at. With a cloud service provider, in terms of backups, one thing that you might need to take into account is it might be a little bit slower because you're going through the internet to actually recover. But if you can deal with that, then a cloud service provider is a great way to go with. Alternatively, you've got it stored in a different location somewhere else. That way, if something bad does happen, ransomware gets into our system, worst case scenario, we're actually enabled ourselves to recover from that attack and get ourselves back to business operation as normal. Not really a method of prevention in this case, much more a recovery method, but it's such a critical recovery method for something as bad as ransomware that really does have to be mentioned. And like I say, it allows you to recover, get back to business as normal. You don't require to engage with the attacker at all, and you don't have to pay that ransom. You can actually take it into your own hands. Now, whenever we see ransomware incidents at New Zealand, the recovery process is really determined by what level of information that organization has backups done. If they don't have any, then that recovery is going to be really hard, and it often can result in the end of a business, sadly. If they have really good backups, then actually they don't often need a lot from us. They will get in touch, they'll let us know, we'll give some recommendations and advice, and then they'll start that backup process and they get back to business operation in a couple of days. And that's a really good outcome when it comes to ransomware. Right, and the last one, again, not really a preventative measure in this case, but a really good step for businesses to take is to configure some level of alerting. It might be just logging and alerting on your website, for example, but you can actually tailor this alerting to see specific things that you're interested in, something like multiple failed login attempts to certain accounts or certain assets, actually successful login attempts to anything that's really, really business critical. That way you can monitor, someone accessed that, I knew they were going to log in there, that's absolutely fine. Or someone's accessed our really critical database. No one should be logging into that at this time, something for me to investigate. You can set up alerts for configuration changes if you're a technical person, password changes on really important accounts. Or also we've got the alerts coming from our 2FA requests. Now, any 2FA requests that haven't been successful, so the person wasn't able to log in through that, that's a really good alert to set up because, again, that's an indication that someone is trying to log into that account. The other thing that logging and alerting will do is give you a paper trail. So if something does go wrong, you can actually look at that logging and you can look back through exactly what happened so that you can fix up that issue so it's not going to happen again. Maybe a user did click a link and maybe they did provide their valid credentials. You'd be able to see that those valid credentials were used to log into that asset or that database or that account or whatever it may be, and that was the initial intrusion point. And then you have some awareness that phishing is an issue for your organization and that maybe you need to put some time into building that security awareness across your users. Again, not so much a preventative measure as it is making sure, giving you something to look at if something does go wrong and setting up those alerts to hopefully set the alarm off so that you can take some action before things get really bad. Think of it like having an alarm system for your house. You lock your doors, that's your username and password, but you also have an alarm on your house just in case someone does get in. Those alarm bells can really get set off. And a lot of what I've talked about today will have a third-party service provider involved. So I think it's really important to acknowledge the important question of how do you choose the right cloud service provider? What if I'm looking for someone who does backups? What if I'm looking for someone that I can get a password manager from? All these different questions to ask. And it can be really hard if you don't work in IT and you're not sure where to start. Cloud service providers can make things a lot easier for you. They might be able to give you access to software without you needing to buy that software yourself or having licenses to that software yourself. They might enable you to access your data at any time from anywhere. Might be a remote working solution, or they might have that storage base for your backups and your data and those kinds of things. But there's a few important questions that we should really look at asking these service providers before we actually engage and use their products. One, and the one that I would not look past, is do they have 2FA? Especially if they have my backups, they have all my customer information, then having two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication enabled on their service is a really great first step. Will they be doing the backups for me? Is that a regular process that they'll go through? Is that automatically happening, or is that a manual process that I need to go through? That I have the facilities, I have the service to do it, but I still need to do it myself, or is that something that they take care of? What if they have a security issue? How will they notify their customers? How will they deal with that kind of security issue? And actually looking into the past, using Google's your friend. Have they had a security issue in the past? How did they deal with it at the time? We've actually seen that security issues in big companies often don't spell the end for those companies, and how they deal with it can actually catapult them further into success than actually be detrimental for them. If companies are really front-footing these cybersecurity incidents, if they're honest and upfront about it and they take the time to improve their systems afterwards, it can actually have a really beneficial impact for the organization. So a bit of research about the service provider. Have they dealt with anything like that in the past, and what did they do? And then the worst case scenario, what happens if they have a breach? What happens if your data is involved in that? How are they going to deal with that? How are they going to make that right with the customers? But also, what happens if the company goes under? What happens if they sell to another company? In the tech space, companies are being bought up all the time. It's a reality. So what does that look like? If you get bought by a bigger provider, how are they going to handle my data? How are these things going to translate through? These are just a few questions to look at asking a cloud service provider before you really engage with them. But any kind of service provider that has intimate access to your accounts or stores any kind of information or anything like that, definitely making sure they've got some level of two-factor authentication is probably the first question that I would be asking.
Those are all really great questions when it comes to cloud services. I never even would have thought about it. But curious to know, let's say you've got all of your stuff in one cloud service and you've decided maybe they've done nothing wrong, but you figured out, oh, this one's cheaper, or for whatever reason you want to move your data over. That's possible, right? We can take our data out of, and how do we know that they're not holding it any longer? Because we're talking about air. Essentially, right?
Yeah. A figurative thing. Yeah. No, absolutely. And this is where the legislation like the Privacy Act really come into play. So under the Privacy Act, there are some requirements to hold on to data, but that is only data that's specifically your customer at that time. So if you were to end a contract with someone, and I believe that they would have no obligation to hold on to that data, and actually to be compliant with the Privacy Act, they need to make sure that they are removing that data. But also part of that Privacy Act is making sure that we can always access our information, and being able to take that information away from one provider, move it to another provider is certainly within our rights as users, as consumers, as customers of those service providers that need to adhere to the Privacy Act. So I would say just having a bit of knowledge around the Privacy Act, what that means for you as a customer, but also looking at the privacy statements of these companies is really important as well. Privacy statements is basically how those companies will tell you how they'll handle and use your data. And I've actually got a mention of a privacy statement tool on the next slide. So I'm going to use that as a really nice segue. Look, I could sit up here and I could talk for about 4 hours about all these kinds of things. I really enjoy this kind of stuff, but I wanted to sort of tackle some of the more achievable things, some things that people could walk away and do today. But there are some other things that I really love to mention. Having an incident response plan. Actually, no, I'll go to the privacy statement first. On later slides with all the tools and resources and things, there's actually a link to what's called the Privomatic, I think, by the Office of the Privacy Commissioner here in New Zealand. What it is, it's a tool that will basically create a privacy statement with you. It's a tool that you can use to build a privacy statement for your company or your business. And basically a privacy statement is how you tell your customers how you'll collect and disclose and use their information. And having a good privacy statement is actually a really great way to build that trust with your customers. So on that point, checking the privacy statements of the businesses that you're looking at doing business with, that you're using a service of, is a really great step to take. But also a great step for your organization, your business, especially if you're collecting any kind of customer information, customer data. Telling your customers how you're going to deal with that data is a great step to take. Coming back to having an incident response plan, unfortunately, even when everything is done well, everything is done right, things can still slip through the cracks. These vulnerabilities can be really tricky. They can pop up out of nowhere and be exploited before you're even aware that there was something that you needed to patch. Things can still happen. And so having a plan in case something does happen, in case something does go wrong, is really important. And that plan could be as simple as having some specific phone numbers listed down in an order of which you're going to call them. It might be, hey, we've got an IT service provider, so if something goes wrong, we're going to get them on the phone first and foremost to see what they need and what they need us to do. It might even be really in-depth in saying specifically what actions you're going to take if a specific kind of incident was to occur. If our environment is ransomware, we're going to do A, B, C, all the way through to the resolution of the incident. Again, the level of detail that you go into with your incident response plan, it will be dependent on your organization. It will be dependent on your capacity and these kinds of things. But even just having a list of key people to call, might be your IT person, it might be reporting to CERT New Zealand. Having that list in writing, so that if something does go wrong, it's a really stressful time when an incident occurs, especially if it's a biggest incident that could sort of spell the demise of your business. So having that written out, knowing exactly what to do and when to do it is really powerful. It's really important. Another one I wanted to mention was building user security awareness. So our 10 critical controls are actually changed and updated every year based on what we're seeing. And in 2023, we changed one of them for building user security awareness, because people and our organizations are a really critical part of that chain. About 82%, and this is reported by a number of really big organizations, Microsoft, Trend Micro, just to name a few, 80 to 90% of all breaches or all incidents include some human element, What that's basically saying is that the vast majority of these things are starting with phishing and credential harvesting. The vast majority of these things are starting because someone clicked on a link and provided their credentials. And there could be a number of reasons why they do that. I mean, I know people who are in IT who have just gotten a text at the wrong time. They've had something else going on. They're really stressed out. They're not thinking about it. They get a text and they just click that link. So it can happen to anyone. And we know based on these reports from these really big organizations that people are often that first point of access for attackers into our environments. So actually taking the time to build our people up in terms of security is really important. And I'd actually make the argument that security risks these days should be treated as business risks, because the reality is, how many businesses out there can operate without internet access? How many operate without a website? How many don't have a phone number or something like that? So building that user security awareness is incredibly powerful, even if it just looks like sitting down the organization saying, look, the reality these days is that you're going to get a text message, a phishing text message. You're going to get phishing emails. It's not a question of if, it's now a question of when. And so building that awareness, enabling them to know that it's going to happen and keep a mindful eye out, enabling them to report it to certain places that might be internally if you've got the right teams or the right people. It might be reporting to CERT New Zealand if you don't have those teams, if you're a smaller organization. Enabling them to report it somewhere and actually do something with that contact is also a really powerful step to take. But wherever we can build that awareness and help people not click those links and not provide those credentials is a really powerful tool. Now, actually, on that fact, phishing and credential harvesting being the biggest incident that we see, I could also do a 4-hour presentation on that alone, and that not 4 hours long, but maybe that's something we could look at doing in the future.
I would love that. I'm obsessed with all of this. It's sort of like a little true crimey for me. I'm basic over here. I love all the true crime stuff. So for me, this is really interesting to see like how this has come into the world, the digital world, and how it's spread throughout the world, really, like the whole internationally, the same stuff is happening over and over. So it's not just targeted to here.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that's so true. And, using those global networks of other certs, we can say confidently the same kinds of things that we're seeing here are being seen around the world.
Mm-hmm.
Phishing and credential harvesting is the biggest issue, not just for us, but most of the countries around the globe, because it can lead to so many other things. But often those big things start with phishing and credential harvesting, which requires a person to click that link and provide that detail. So build those people up. Bring them along on that journey with you. Make them aware of your incident response plan if you've got one. Let them know somewhere that they can report something, and just let them know that, yeah, you are likely to receive this kind of stuff. And it's actually really important that you know that so that you can help keep the business safe as well. It's not just about keeping the business safe, though. It's about keeping them safe too. If you can build their skills up within the organizational environment, you're actually building those skills up for them as an individual as well. You might prevent them from falling victim to these scams and losing all the money in their own account. And that's a pretty big one as well. Now, the last one on this page is just around default admin credentials. It sounds a little bit weird, but if you have a product that has administration credentials by default, administration level access to anything by default, it's really important that you change those default credentials. Sounds a little bit silly, but it's not uncommon that attacks occur because someone didn't change those default credentials. They stayed admin for 3 to 6 months, and an attacker abused that fact, was able to get into the environment or the software, whatever it may be, by using those default credentials. So change those wherever you have them. That's a really important step to take as well. Now, the last few slides, I think there's about 3 here. This is just where I list out a number of links, number of pages, number of resources, these kinds of things. We've got stuff on everything that we've talked about today. Patching your software and systems, implementing multi-factor authentication, using and providing a password manager. That's actually a really good call out. I talked about using a password manager, but if you have the capacity in your organization to provide a password manager to your employees as well, then you're going to be even more secure. You're enabling them to have really good passwords. They're not able to fall victim to phishing and credential harvesting. That's a really powerful step to take. However, that will probably incur some level of cost, and not every organization is going to have the capacity for that. Implementing and testing those backups. We've got a page specifically on backups for business there, as well as the critical control entry. Yes, Georgia?
I'm just going to have you go back one, because I want to just recommend to everyone to take a screenshot of this right now so you have it. We will probably provide a link to these slides I'd love
Yeah.
to do that if we could provide a link to these slides for everybody, especially for those who are watching the recording. But yes, continue. Screenshots, everybody do it.
Yeah. I mentioned briefly earlier, two-factor authentication directory is a link that you'll notice in there. And basically what that does is it'll tell you the sites or the systems or services that have two-factor authentication and what level that they have it enabled in. So that just gives you a bit of a catalog to say, okay, I use this website, I use this service. They have two-factor authentication. It looks like this for them and it looks like that for them. Just a little bit of easier way to sort of keep track of who does what in the 2FA space. But I'm happy for these slides to be shared as I say, Georgia, so that should be all good. Link to the privacy statement there, how cloud works, how to pick cloud service providers, incident response plan. I'd encourage people to click on that link. That's quite a in-depth guide on building an incident response plan, what you should have in there, what's really important to have, and then default credentials, what you need to change and how. Last one, a couple of things I haven't mentioned on this page, just a link to reporting to Cert New Zealand. If you have any kind of cybersecurity incident, even if you get an email and you're just not sure if it's genuine or not, and you just want someone to look it over, that's something that we do pretty commonly. You can report to Cert New Zealand and we'll give you some free advice and guidance. And the second one on this list is a business cyber health check. Very, very short little survey. It doesn't collect any information. What it'll do is basically ask you what level of information you have of certain things in your own organization. And then it'll give you a bit of an output to say, here's a few places that you could improve. Here's a few things that you could do to improve. And it gives you a bit of a starting point additional to what we've gone over today.
We've got a question from me. Oh, yeah. We've got any questions? I'm like, yes, we do. All right, so Belinda's got a question. Hi, in regard to MFA 2FA, how do you think employees should react to needing their personal phone to log into their work computer? And what happens if they leave their phone behind?
Yep, this is the great question. It's the balancing act between security and accessibility. Should users be required to use their personal phones for two-factor authentication? Wherever you're providing a cell phone as well as a device to an employee, you should certainly be doing two-factor authentication on the organizational devices themselves. But if your employee is someone that has access to something really critical in the business, something really important that you need that additional layer of security, then enabling two-factor authentication on some level might be a requirement. Of sort of that role. So it's not the most unreasonable thing. Individuals might have reservations themselves against that. But I recommend the best way you can do it is rather than sort of getting them to enroll their own personal mobile number, I'd look at an authenticator app. Microsoft Authenticator, for example, get them to download this app, and then basically through the app, you link to the account that they're logging into. And then the app will generate a code. So they're not providing any of their personal information in this regard. They're not giving their mobile number. They're not associating their mobile number with an account so that they can't do it themselves in the future or anything like that. So my recommendation there would be looking at those authenticator apps specifically. It avoids them having to provide any personal information, but it still gives you a implementation of multi-factor authentication that will keep you nice and secure.
That's fantastic. Any other questions? Oh, someone else. Yeah, have them come in. They're here. Oh, okay, it's Belinda. Then if we get them to use the work computer to use for the MFA 2FA, and it is personal to that employee, what happens if they are sick or leave and we need access to the computer?
That would kind of suggest that whatever they're trying to access, they might be the only one that has access to that specific thing, which can be an issue in organizational spaces. I've seen that sort of happen before, where you might need a specific password for something, but only one person can access that password manager. And so defining level of access for specific roles within your organization is a really good exercise to take sort of at the start. So you can say that people in these specific roles need access to these specific things. And what that will do is outline wherever you've got those bottlenecks, wherever you've got only one person can access this system asset, whatever it may be. And that's something that wherever you can, avoiding is a good step to take. Having two people that can access the same system as a positive thing. What we're getting into here is the principle of least privilege, which is another critical control and a really good step to take, but it's making sure that people only have the lowest level of access that they need to do their job. If they need additional access to other things, they can get that, but they need to be provided that and only for a limited amount of time. But as it stands, they only have access to the bare minimum that they need to do their job. And this is where those bottlenecks can arise. You might only have one person that can access certain systems, but going through the process of actually mapping the specific roles in your organizations and what level of access that they have to what assets, what services is a really important step to take. And then that will show you where you've only got one person that can access one certain thing, and anywhere that you can give sort of make sure that you've got at least two people that can access the same thing is a really important step to take, just because in case that exact thing happens where maybe an employee suddenly leaves, has something really, really bad go on with a family member and they have to travel overseas. They've got their personal devices with them. They can't give you those codes. So having another person that can access those accounts, those assets is important. You just need to make sure that they've got the same level of security. So they also have to go through that two-factor authentication. For business assets, for business accounts, it is possible to enroll multiple devices for the same multi-factor authentication challenge. It's a little bit trickier, but it is possible to do. And then that way, another device will be able to generate the code that can access and pass that two-factor authentication challenge. But I do really like that exercise of mapping level of access to specific roles. And so you can understand who has access to what in your organization and avoid those bottlenecks wherever you can.
Yeah, I have one of our attendees has said we used, I don't know how to pronounce it. Is it Twilio?
Yeah.
Twilio or Twilio? Yep. And they said 2FA is very good for when staff leave also. So that's good to know.
Yeah, and I to that point, I do believe that the organizations behind two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication implementations are aware of these kinds of issues. So they do enable that so that other people, so that you can still access critical systems, even if one individual is away. But that's a really great question to ask a provider of any services or any assets that you might be looking at using. How would you get around that? What if this issue arises? You know, those are all really, really great questions to be asking.
Yeah. Well, Sam, for me, this has been incredible to see all of these controls in one place. You kind of hear about it a little bit here, 2FA and, password manager, but seeing it all together and knowing that, oh, if we implement these things, updating your software, I'm the worst at that, I have to admit. So but things like that, seeing it in order and going, okay, here's a way that I can take control of my own cybersecurity. And then also to know, all right, so in the end, if I do need to, I've got Cert NZ I can report things to and get questions answered. The other thing is you have a program, Cert has got a new program that is launching during Cyber Smart Week. Am I right about that?
Yeah, that's correct. So this is something that's called Own Your Online. And basically what it's all about is, as we've kind of said, it's enabling people themselves to take cybersecurity into their own hands and make themselves a little bit more secure. I mean, I think what's really tricky with cybersecurity is that when you hear it, it sounds quite technical. It sounds quite, mysterious and dark, black hoodie on in the basement kind of feel. But the reality is that everyone's online these days. And so cybersecurity is not all that different to your personal responsibility to lock your house when you leave, or lock your car when you leave your car, all these kinds of things. And what we basically want to do is empower people to take it into their own hands, to say, it's not that scary, I can do this, and make their cybersecurity just a little bit better, make sure that they're a little bit more cyber resilient, and that New Zealand's a little bit of a harder place for attackers and scammers to actually get a foothold in.
Well, thank you for helping us do that in your position, so own your online. Is that right? Own your online. Yep. And that's going to be launching. Cyber Smart Week is end of October, beginning of November, right? The 30th of October.
That's right.
5th of November. Okay, great. That's what I thought. Fantastic.
Sorry, just very, very quickly. In the past, Cyber Smart Week has been very specific tips that we really try to get out there and get people to enable. And this year, it's going to be a lot more sort of holistic. It's going to be more about making cybersecurity something that matters to individuals, boosting up the importance, and again, enabling everyone to take it into their own hands and improve their cybersecurity themselves.
Well, I think to your point, what you said about we leave our houses, we lock our door, we haven't thought about
Yeah.
our digital world in that way. And so that's a really great way of putting it is, we just got to lock our digital door as well.
That's the one.
And do that. And you've made that really easy for us. So thank you so much. Thanks for taking the time to come and chat with us. I want to thank everyone who tuned in and who comes in and tunes in every week. Sam, I'm going to drag you back here. I know you don't have a ton of time, but I'm saying it now and I'm saying it to all these people. I'm dragging you back because I think we have lots more to talk about. So
yeah, that sounds good. Like I said, I could talk for 4 hours about passwords. I could talk 4 hours about phishing. So we can certainly do another one.
It's not boring. That's what I have to say. It's just not boring. So thank you so much. And thanks everybody. Come back on Thursday. We've got another Q&A with our Digital Boost, Emily Ragg. We're going to be talking about Checkable a little bit more. And I will see you all then. Thanks, Sam. Bye,
Thanks,
everyone. Matewa.